You're listening to Northwoods Church Matters, a podcast of Northwoods Church in Evansville, Indiana, where we discuss why the local church matters and things that matter to the local church. I'm your host, Matt Higgins. Hey, welcome back to the Northwoods Church Matters podcast. We've got Rachel Bland with us today, our women's ministry director.
Hello, friends.
Hello, friends. And we're starting a new series here on Northwoods Church Matters, and we're going to get to know different people in the church and hear their testimonies. This series is going to be called Stories. And so I'm excited to share stories. But in order to do this, I decided I'll be the first guinea pig.
That's right.
You know, there's the old adage about not asking others to do something you would not be willing to do yourself.
So here we are.
Here we are. And so we're going to talk about what makes Matt Higgins tick.
I'm excited about this because I feel like I'm going to learn things that I didn't know. So,
oh boy, I guess so.
There's no script on this one, guys.
Yeah, there really is no script.
All right. So tell us where you grew up.
So I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, on the south side in Chesterfield County. Went to Robius Middle School, Monaghan High School. Still have a lot of friends and a lot of roots there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you traveled all the way across Midwest to get to Evansville.
Yeah, I've been in many states and lived in many states. Virginia to Massachusetts to Virginia to Texas to Indianapolis to Evansville. And so I've been a lot of places. You know, childhood was good for me. I mean, it was me and my brother, Andy, who is 3 years younger than me. We were pretty good buds growing up. Spent a lot of time playing with him. We lived, as I said, Southside Richmond, a little subdivision called Brighton Green, Brigton Green. Everybody was pretty middle class where we were. It was all families around the same age as us. A lot of kids lived in that neighborhood. And so we had a lot of friends in the neighborhood. We'd all ride bikes together and jump things together and ride skateboards together and that stuff. So we had a good group of kids to kind of hang out with.
Did you guys have in the cul-de-sac a giant stop sign where your parents were like, you can't go past the stop sign or anything like that?
No, this is a different day and age. Of course, we wouldn't go on the main road, but we were everywhere. Our house backed up to a set of woods, and then the woods backed up to McDonald's. And so that was kind of our place. Like, we'd be in the woods all the time.
So you weren't one of those that played inside. You were an outsider.
No, I mean, we had like the early video game system. It was a big deal when we had the Commodore 64 or the Atari, things like that. I remember Dad bringing home an Atari, and that was a big deal. But no, we were outside kids, and I think my mom was thankful for that. We were pretty crazy and pretty wild and pretty energetic. We both had bikes, and I think we lived on our bikes and rode everywhere we could all around. We were never in the house, especially Andy was never in the house because Andy had more friends in the neighborhood than I did, and so he just lived at other people's houses. The coolest kid in our neighborhood, his name was spelled Gunner, but he liked people to call him Gunnar, and he had a half pipe in his backyard. He'd have people come over and skateboard with him. He was the cool kid in the neighborhood.
Whoever has the toys, man.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about.
Boys and toys.
That's right. Okay, so tell us about your first experience with church, or at least that you remember.
We'd always kind of go to church. I mean, we spent most of our childhood at Bonnier Baptist Church on the south side, which is a pretty large church now. It wasn't at the time, but it's now got multiple campuses and things like that. It has a lot of connections to the IMB because it's close to the International Mission Board. It was a great church to grow up in. Met a lot of great people that taught us a lot about Christ. My experience with church started off in a little bit of a negative way. When we first started going to church, there was a pastor that was retiring, and he wanted all the kids to get saved in the church before he retired. And so he held a class, and he wanted all the kids to come so that he could share Jesus with them. I didn't know anything about that and wasn't interested in that. And so I think rightly, my mom didn't force us to go to that class. But one of my earliest memories of church was that pastor crying in front of the church because not all the kids in the church got saved. And that made me feel pretty crappy. And I didn't know what it meant to get saved anyway.
Yeah.
So,
how old were you when that happened?
Oh, probably early elementary school, 5, 6, 7 years old. And so it made me wary of church. That's not a knock on Bonnier Baptist. It was a great church to grow up in, but I had concerns about pastors and
Mm-hmm.
being manipulated and things like that. And so I think I had a suspicion of pastors in church after that.
So what about the infamous question? What was Matt like as a teenager?
If you were to compare Andy and I, Andy was the wild one. Compared to him, I was the studious kid. Andy was the one that started a fire behind our house and
I have heard that story.
and threw a Molotov cocktail at somebody and all the things that go along with Andy being unique and weird. I was the more studious kid. I like to not get into trouble. I think I was a smart kid. I was more into arts and things like that. I was very much into singing and choir. I did show choir for a while.
Did you do the dancing too?
I did do the dancing.
Oh, yes.
There's video out there.
We need to find these.
They exist. I have pictures as well with green sequin vests. And I didn't really have a lot of friends, though. And so I was a loner, kept a lot to myself. I had a pretty peculiar little group of friends. We're all the weirdos that like Rush albums and Led Zeppelin and things like that. But I did get picked on a lot. I was bullied a lot, and I didn't really have big self-esteem. I was very depressed, and that depression just continued on as life went along. I felt isolated, felt alone. My brother was the guy that had the big bevy of friends around him because he was willing to do anything. I was the rational, isolated guy. And so my big problem growing up was just depression and just not feeling confident, feeling worthy, feeling good about myself. And so that's the big struggle of my life. So I didn't do a ton of crazy stuff in high school. So if people are looking for stories of Matt partying or doing a line of cocaine, that's not me.
How did you become a Christian, especially with what you were talking about in the early elementary being weary? So how did you come to know Jesus?
I had a friend who lived around the corner, actually more of an acquaintance than a friend. And in high school, you know, if you had a car, you were cool. And so I had a friend around the corner. His name was Mike, and he had a brown wood panel station wagon, and it was pretty rocking. He actually had a personalized license plate that said brown limo.
That is awesome.
Yes. And so he was a Christian, and his goal was to use that car for the glory of God.
Wow.
And so he was very involved in Young Life. His parents were very involved with Young Life. His parents were strong believers. He just asked me if I wanted to go to Young Life. As a kid that didn't have a lot of friends or a lot of relationships, that really made a difference and made an impact. And so,
what is Young Life for those who don't know?
Yeah, so Young Life is a parachurch organization. Young Life is not a church, but they're a Christian organization, and their goal is to reach out to kids in the school system and to witness to them. That organization is still going today. They do lots of good work. I love Young Life still. My eyes light up whenever somebody says that they're involved with Young Life. You know, eventually I become a regular at Young Life, began to really start hearing the gospel in a meaningful way. And for the first time,
So you're in high school now,
you're
right?
in high school, yeah. And Young Life, they really were able to make that connection. Okay, this is how the gospel applies to your life, and made it simple. They used a lot of Navigator's discipleship materials. I remember going on a Young Life retreat, my very first retreat that I went on. There was a great speaker that was there, but he was just sharing at the end of the sermon from Romans 6:23. You know, the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. He actually went over the bridge illustration, which we use as our evangelism model here at Northwoods. He closed with this illustration about driving, which was kind of personal for all of us who were 16 and driving. But he was talking about a lot of us in life, we want to take the driver's seat in the car and we want to drive, and we end up wrecking the car and wrecking our lives. We need to give the wheel over to Jesus, who is the author of our life and the perfecter of our life. And he's the one that should be in the driver's seat and driving, and we should be shotgun. And so that's really the illustration that made me want to give my life to Christ. At that Young Life retreat, that's when I gave my heart to the Lord. And then later on was baptized at my local church, got more involved in my local church. And, you know, I wound up hooking up with a group of guys from my church that became kind of my people in my community. We had a rap band and everything. So it was an interesting time. I'm surprised still what my mom would let me do during that time. some of the guys in that rap group had graduated already from high school when I was still in high school. They knew more people and they can get more gigs for us. And so Charles would say, hey, I've got a gig for us in Stanton, which is 2 hours away from Richmond. Gosh. My mom was like, okay, go ahead. And I'm thankful for a mom that was allowing me to drive all over the state of Virginia and everywhere else to go to weird gigs while I was still in high school. And
now as a parent of a almost 16-year-old.
Oh, I would never let a 16-year-old do that. So
that's so fun.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, is that once you become a Christian, your life suddenly gets easier.
Sure.
That's not true. I've actually been reading through the book of Acts, and that book alone should prove that following Jesus is very, very, very difficult.
#fact.
I mean, I know you mentioned your struggle with depression and all of that kind of stuff, but how do you struggle even now as a Christian?
Well, I think for a while, depression has been the defining struggle of my life because it's something that continually I battle and continually I fight with. I think, especially as a young Christian, there's a tendency to still have heart idols and things that we pursue that we think are going to make us happy. We often, young in life, think about, well, once I'm married, I'll be happy. Or once I have a job, or once I have a career, or once I'm doing this. There's always another milestone ahead of you. Well, if I can just get to this in my life stage, then I'll finally be happy and then I won't be depressed anymore. But then you learn that throughout all these different stages, there's still suffering. And if we're putting our hope in these things to turn our life around or to turn our emotions around, then we're trusting in the wrong things. And that continues on today. But today, as older and wiser, you realize, yeah, these things aren't going to provide me meaning or purpose or fulfillment. As you get older, it's the more smaller things or the more insidious things or the more hidden things that still come along that you have to challenge and struggle with. But depression was a pretty big defining part of my life. And I still struggle with depression today. And I have counselors, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I have had people that have been good to me in my life, that have spoken into my life, that have counseled me. I figured out a lot of different things as a result of that. I think one of my big things that I struggle with is just fear of people, which sounds weird to a lot of people that would know me. But, I struggle with that too. And by fear of people, I define that as making decisions on what other people think versus what God calls me to do.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle for a lot of people.
For sure.
But it definitely is a struggle in terms of being a leader in a church, because suddenly you have 50, 100, 500 people saying...
You have 500 bosses.
You have 500 bosses. You have 500 people that want to be the boss or have different opinions on things. I mean, masking would be one that's relevant right now. And so it's hard sometimes, to kind of drown out the other voices and try to figure out, okay, so what does God really call me and want me to do?
I love that. I think the focus shift between, instead of focusing on the struggle and then just letting your eyes be fixed on the Lord, how do you make sure that your eyes are on the Lord?
The big thing is to have openness in your life and being able to talk with others about what you're struggling with. And I know that may seem like a small thing, but I think it's a really big thing. I think that there was a very limited circle of people throughout most of my life that knew that I struggled with depression. I never talked about it. I never shared it. My wife knew.
Right.
But I don't think that a lot of people knew. That pressure to keep things secret becomes greater the more that you're in leadership in the church.
Right.
Because there's an expectation or a feeling that you've got to have it all together in order to be a leader in the church, whether it be as a volunteer or anything else. And I've led in different positions for a long time. And that's not bragging. It's just saying the deeper in that you get, often the feeling grows that I can't release this secret because what would people think? And how would my role change that I enjoy based on the revelation of this secret? But I went through a very difficult time in my first church that I was called to be pastor of. And I finally broke down and I went to see a counselor for the first time. I went to see a biblical counselor in Greenwood at Rod and Staff Ministries, great organization. And I remember just walking in the room and the guy asked me one question and I just completely broke down because it was this sense of finally, I'm talking to people about what I struggle with. It's not a secret. And the biggest revelation from that, or the biggest understanding from that I developed, is that it's okay to have problems and be in church leadership. It's okay to lead with a limp, as one of the books that's out there says. It's okay. And your congregation will love you more the more honest that you are with what you struggle with. People need to hear about your wins and your success stories, but they need to also hear about how you're struggling as well. And that makes it more authentic. I remember a seminary professor that I had was talking about, he said that he didn't become a pastor to his church until he let them know about his child's illness.
Oh, wow.
And when he opened up about that and how he was struggling with that, how his family was struggling with that, really the church rallied around him and they really grew together as family. Churches, there's a loss there when they don't hear about what their pastors are struggling with. We need to be supported as well,
right,
as leaders in the church. And we can't do this on our own either. And so that is all to say is, I think the big turning point for me in depression was really learning the secretive nature of it. The shame nature of it was more of what I was struggling with than anything else. And once the secret is out, there's just a giant lifting of weight. Yeah. There's freedom in that, and telling people. I hope people hear that and they are encouraged by that. There was a pastor here in the area recently that was a beloved guy. He was one of the regional church planners, Dale Eakes, that he went through depression and he wound up committing suicide. And a lot of us were shocked by that, but people don't understand that often pastors are hurting too.
Right.
They feel like often that they have to keep these secrets and hold them inside because they're in leadership and nobody would really understand. And that becomes a hard thing. It feels like you're trapped. That's a bad place to be trapped by shame. Even if you're not a church leader, even if you're the average churchgoer on a Sunday, there's still the factor of shame that can come into your life. What would my wife think of this struggle? Or what would my kids think? Or what would my work family think? Or what would my extended family think? And there's a pressure to keep secrets because we're afraid of what other people are going to think. Mm-hmm. And that's dangerous and demonic.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what the Lord wants. I mean, what the Lord wants is Galatians 6:2, which is carry one another's burdens. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it means to be family.
Talk about your calling into ministry.
So I had a long calling. I don't know why I had this particular interest, but when I was in high school, I got really interested in politics. I just was fascinated by it. And so I went to college at James Madison and entered as a poli-sci major, came to realize that I'm never going to get a job with this major. And then I took a course in public administration, met a dude that was teaching that class who is the city manager of Bridgewater, Virginia. And it was just fascinating. To me, it was fascinating in terms of, oh, this is a job. I get to work in local government. And I thought it was fairly interesting. Other people would find it boring, but I was like, that's what I want to do. So I switched my major from political science to public administration. And then I was so into it that I immediately got my master's degree in public administration. And then Dana immediately got her master's degree in social work. And then after we got our master's degrees, we were married and confident in exactly what we wanted to do with the rest of our lives. And so my first job, I went and I got a job in Lowell, Massachusetts. I moved up there. Dana moved up there. It was a great experience. For the first time, we're away from home, but also it's just a different church context. I mean, growing up in the South, there's a church on every corner. I remember when I first moved up there, I was like, okay, I'm going to scope out a church and find a church for Dana and I to go to once we're married. And I pulled out the phone book and there was...
The phone book.
The phone book. Yes. This is when we had the phone book before the internet. But there was one Southern Baptist church in the phone book.
Yep.
Ironically, there were 100 Dunkin' Donuts locations in Lowell.
America runs on Dunkin'.
Massachusetts definitely runs on Dunkin'. I mean, that's the popular thing that's up there in Massachusetts, but that's free information. But we were confident in what we wanted to do. Dana was going to be a social worker. I was going to work in government, and we were both doing it. All the while, we were volunteering in student ministry that was up there. And there's certain churches that you join, and those churches kind of become a defining moment of your life, not because the preaching is better or programs are better or anything like that, but just because you have relationships and people that really define your life. And there were a lot of young adults that were in that church that were our age. We had a good group of people. We were all working in youth ministry together, and just God is doing amazing things through those people right now. But there was one retreat. It was kind of a centrifuge type retreat. You know, we went into the worship service, and remember the corny worship song from back in the day, Amazing Love, How Can It Be?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So we were singing that song, and they got to the point of the song where the line was, "In all I do, I honor you." And I just got a sense from the Lord while singing that song, I'm not honoring him. And it got to the point where I just couldn't sing that line of the song. And I remember going outside of the sanctuary and then breaking down and saying to God, okay, if I'm not honoring you, tell me what you want me to do and how I can honor you. And so I knew the Lord was calling me to work with youth, work with students, and to do that with the rest of my life. And so went home, started getting information on seminary. The more information I got, the more cold feet that I got. And eventually threw all the seminary information away. I was like, this is too expensive. This costs too much money. Any excuse I had under the sun. Well, we stayed in Massachusetts for a while. Dana's mom died, and then we moved back to Virginia. I was doing very well in my career, was in line to eventually become a county administrator, city manager, which was my goal. You know, the Lord called me again and just relentlessly pursued me. And it was at another youth retreat. I knew what I was supposed to do. And so I went home to Dana, and I was nervous to tell her, but I was like, I think we need to give up our careers and go into ministry. And Dana was washing dishes at the time. And she turned around and she said, well, it's about time.
Wow.
And so she knew my heart and knew what I was supposed to do. And that was good affirmation for that. And so we sold the house, and Gwen was about 1 year old then. She's still the only grandkid in my parents' family. And so we took her and moved out to Texas to seminary.
Wow.
And we've been blessed in responding to God's call.
I feel like anyone who is listening to this, I don't know if they're more shocked about the political science or public administration, that sort of thing, or if they're more shocked that music and radio or broadcasting wasn't your degree choice. So,
well, actually, I wanted to do music, but that's an interesting thing. When I went to college, I was political science major and then music minor. I had gotten into the college equivalent of show choir.
Yes.
There's the Madisonians. I did that for a year. I really did not fit in with those people. And they were hard drinking, hard partying. What you think of when you think of frat people. I don't really think I clicked with the director well, because she would actually go and host parties where there was drinking with the members on the team. And I would think I went once, and everybody was just sloppy drunk. And I was like, this is the stupidest thing ever. I had never done that in high school, did not do that in college. And so I just didn't click with that group of people. And so when it came to audition time, next semester rolled around for the Madisonians, I tried out again, and mysteriously I did not make the cut this time. And I think some of it had to do with my personal relationship with the director of that group. Right. I mean, I really was not interested in having music as a career. I was very rational. I was like, oh, I'm never going to make any money in music, so I'm not doing this. That rocked my world, because of the technical level of it was that if I wasn't in that class, then I couldn't be a music minor.
Oh, wow.
So it essentially wrecked that whole thing. So I had to drop being a music minor.
God pulled that out of
God pulled that out. But I think, you know, in hindsight, it's one of those situations almost like when going from the small leagues to the big leagues, that when you're a high school star, suddenly you get to college and then you realize, oh, well, maybe I'm not all that. And
you're a little fish in a big pond.
You're a little fish in a big pond. So now I was a big fish in high school in terms of being able to sing and in choir and stuff like that. I had lots of solos and things like that. But once I got to college, the rug was pulled out from under me. And the Lord was really telling me in that time is, until you're not arrogant about this, you're not going to do it. And it's only when God humbled me and I appreciated it more that God gave me those opportunities back.
The fact that now you can use your talents not to make a name for yourself, but to make a name for God is just really cool.
Yeah. God used all the stuff that was in my life to humble me and he brought me some tough experiences in government. It was not wine and roses.
It wasn't Parks and Rec.
It wasn't Parks and Rec. It wasn't super dope, as the kids say.
With all of that said, what is God currently teaching you?
I think God is teaching me about joyfulness right now.
Joy to the world.
Yes, that is the song that Rachel sings all over the office.
I do sing that a lot, actually.
You do sing that a lot. But just the lesson of being joyful despite any circumstances has just been something that's been on my heart a lot. I'm getting that Philippians 4 concept more down about being content in every circumstance. And, there's ebbs and flows of life. There's ups and downs of life. There's rhythms of life where things are more crummier than others. I think your goal really is to trust God regardless of what ups and downs there are. And so I think that's been something that God has been working on my heart and teaching me. And where is my joy and my identity found? I think going through COVID, it was a rough time. Like, okay, what do I do now that there's no church? I think your identity sometimes gets wrapped up in what you do. Yeah, just learning contentment and just being happy in life and being joyful at all times is something that I'm working on and the Lord is impressing upon me. And I'm thankful for that lesson.
Alec and I have that conversation often because I always am looking ahead in the sense of, I can't wait for this because I'm just an excitable person. If you know me, you know that's true. And so one of the things that he has encouraged me to constantly do is to just enjoy right now. Yeah, you can be excited for the future, but also be excited right now in this moment. Enjoy just the mundane of waking up, making breakfast, going to your work or going to your job or going to school, whatever. How do you find joy in the journey is what he always says. So
yeah. And I think that another lesson that I'm really working on is just trying to have technology not control me, but have the Lord control technology. I pretty much don't use social media much anymore. I don't read it much anymore. And as I've done that, I realize that my headspace is just a whole lot better by not doing that. I would encourage people, you'll find that your mental health is a lot better the less you're on social media.
I have found that too.
Yeah.
I think that was one of those things that COVID taught me was to just stay away and being present with the people that you're with. I totally get that. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Sure. Hit me. We've gotten to the fun questions.
The fun stuff. What is the first concert you ever attended?
Jethro Tull.
I have no clue who that is.
You have no idea who that is. It's a classic rock band that formed in the 60s, and the lead singer also plays lead flute.
What a combination.
Yeah, and so he plays rock flute. So if you've never heard Jethro Tull, you'll have to pull that up on Spotify. That's a real odd one. And, I went to this concert. It's my first ever concert. I went with a friend from church.
How old were you?
Probably 14. There's people outside that are on soapboxes like, you're going to hell if you see Jethro Tull and street preachers and all this other stuff. Dude, the guy plays a flute. I mean...
A flute.
Is a flute the music of Satan? I don't know.
All right, next one. What is the worst food ever?
Cauliflower.
Amen.
Cauliflower is the worst. Even worse than that is trying to mix in cauliflower with other things.
What about the cauliflower crust at AZIP?
You see, my problem with the cauliflower crust at AZIP is not the taste of it, but I feel like it burns quickly. Like every time feel like I get that, it just burns. But I also hate when people say, well, you just can't taste the cauliflower. That's never true. Like cauliflower rice, it still tastes like cauliflower.
It's still cauliflower.
And even worse is the smell. The smell of cauliflower cooking, it smells like toxic farts. I mean, it's bad.
I like broccoli and carrots, but when they make the medley with the broccoli, carrots, and cauliflower, I'm like, come on.
Right.
Just take it out.
Just broccoli and carrots.
I agree with that. So who is someone that you miss?
I miss my parents, living far away from them. I miss my brother who just recently passed away. And so I wish that he was still around. One of the thoughts that we had recently was, we went to South Dakota and there was a lot of talk at Andy's funeral about how he did the school project in first grade on South Dakota, it just made me a little sad going to South Dakota. And there was a lot of talk about him in South Dakota.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting moment.
What profession would you like to try other than the one you currently have?
Honestly, I really did love working in government and local government. And so
I can't help but think about Parks and Rec.
It is. People ask what was working in government like, and I actually point them to that show. That's probably the most realistic.
If that's realistic, I'm like, oh my.
Oh, especially the public meetings. I mean, anytime there's a public meeting on that show and it's just wacky and people getting up and saying just the most bizarre stuff, I mean, that actually happens. It's 100% accurate. But yeah, I loved it. And so if I weren't doing this, I'd probably go back to that.
What do you do to relax?
I play music at home. I have a home studio at home. I'm into comic books. I buy, sell, trade stuff. And yep, so that's kind of my hobby, is comic books. Ever since my dad brought home a box of comic books when I was a kid, that's kind of been what I've been into.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
What's your favorite music album?
So I'll give two answers for this. My favorite secular album is Copper Blue by Sugar, which is...
Again, no clue.
No clue. It's a band from the 90s. It's an old punk rocker. I love punk rock. And he was in a band called Husker Du, and then a band called Sugar. It's Bob Mould. He's just fantastic. So that's my favorite secular one. Favorite Christian album probably is, let's say, King of Fools by Delirious. It's a classic.
Okay, my favorite question. Not
Yes.
really my favorite, because I really like all of the conversation we had about Jesus.
Yeah, that's good.
But what is Matt Higgins' favorite dessert?
What is Matt Higgins' favorite dessert? I'm not a pie person. I'm not a cookie person. I'm more of a cake person.
No.
Yeah, more of a cake person. So there is a restaurant in Mooresville that the name escapes me, and they have hummingbird cake there. And
I think I've heard you talk about this.
Yeah, it's
what is
the
in
best.
it?
A cake with nuts in it. It's like a walnut type of cake.
It sounds like a Christmas time fruit cake.
It's not fruity. It's more nutty.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's really good.
So you're like a salty sweet kind of dessert guy.
More of a cake kind of guy. I mean, any type of cake I'll eat. Dana used to make cake balls. That used to be her part-time profession, is making cake balls. And she no longer does that, but she made great cake balls.
So you like cake balls too, then?
I do. I was actually pushing her to go into business for herself, and she wouldn't do it. So,
all right. So whoever else is listening to the last question, make some cake balls for us as a staff, and Matt will get the majority of them.
Exactly. Yeah, that'll definitely be true.
Well, thanks for sharing your story.
No problem. Thanks. And your story will be coming up sometime.
Yeah, sometime soon.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to the Northwoods Church Matters podcast. If you'd like to find out more about Northwoods Church, you can visit us at our website, www.northwoodschurch.org. Again, that's www.northwoodschurch.org.